Today's Thinking Thursday is going to be very different, but I am so excited about it. I am allowing myself to introduce 10 words into the English language, and I am handing it off as to our collective responsibility to get these words used enough that they eventually make it into the OED. Now, there's going to be 10, and a few of them have like other versions of the word as well, like other uses, or they have other forms of the word. But basically, there are 10 words, and I'm so excited to share them with you. First of all, I'm going to take you through a little bit of history in regards to English spelling because it is insane. Now, I am slightly biased on this front because I am an avid bookworm. Avid. And yet, I have dyslexia, and I get to look at English from the objective perspective of the scrambling of letters that happens in my head. And I see that even when they are unscrambled and they are written as they're supposed to be written, they make no sense. The phonetics of the English language is just a boggle unit of linguistic chaos. You just bung letters in, shake them up, and then some word comes out. And, it just makes no sense. Read, read, why is that the same? Why? For me, with my dyslexia, things that are actually meant to be different words often get jumbled in my head, like spot and stop. Those are just forever going to be crossed over in my head. And similarly, like D's and B's, my brain will just flip those letters back and forth. So I'm like, what is this? But with actual English spelling, it is complete chaos. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is. Because English language history is weird and remarkably complex. So I'm going to go all the way back to kind of the rune era of words. So this is like pre-7th century. And you had this thing called the Futhark, which is the kind of Germanic rune language that the Anglo-Saxons used pre-7th century. And some of those words are close to what we would use nowadays, like stone would be stan, or man is just man with like two N's. It's like a rune-shaped language, but that's how you pronounce it. And the same as like ak would be what we think of as oak now, or like Beork would be birch. And so there are like gerunds. There is some kind of genus back there that we can connect to, but a lot of it is like, what? It's very, very different. It's very kind of, in its sounding and in its spelling, is very much close to kind of the Scandinavian roots because of its Germanic background. And then in the 7th century, you had a load of Christian missionaries who were like, ho ho, what is this weird language? We must eradicate it. And so they brought in Roman Latin alphabets and Roman Latin words. But the problem was they were trying to use Roman Latin spelling to decipher these Futhark words, which were slightly short on the pronunciation. So you had things like "were," which was called the win, the shape of the letter that the rune had was called the win, and it didn't exist in Latin. They didn't have a "were," and also "the," which, to be honest, like most other languages don't have "the." Like if you try and get Germans to sing "Happy Birthday," they go "Happy Birthday" because they don't have a but like thorn, the "th" from thorn was also not in Latin. So they had to kind of figure that one out, but they tried their best to take on the "th" and "were." And this was kind of around the time that the Christian missionaries were trying to write things down as well. So pre-Christian missionaries, we just have less writing that survives. Like it does actually survive. Like we have runes, but there's just less. The Christians were kind of nerds, they were real bookworms. Like sometimes, or at least I think of them as like crusaders and stuff, but a lot of them were just like in very cold buildings writing lots and lots of text, which just sounds like library nerds, to be honest. Just a whole load of library nerds. But the missionaries were using Latin to describe this Germanic language, and that's where we suddenly get like this higgledy-piggledy thing of Latin trying to explain phonetics that it doesn't even have, which is where you get the first conundrum when it comes to spelling. Then you have the Norman invasion. So William the Conqueror was like, ooh, I'm gonna take over England. And so we have a load of people from Normandy coming over and being like, okay, this like Germanic language, this Germanic rune language run through Latin, we're going to make it all Frenchified. And so with that little problem there, that's where you get things like the win that you had in this, like, kind of looks like a slanty P, that turned into double U, which we use the name W now for the W, but actually originally it was actually two U's. That's how they solved that problem. But with the Frenchification, they were doing things like adding O's into oo sounds. So for example, you used to have hoose in Old English, which was H-U-S, which got turned into H-O-U-S, same as Hund. The German today for dog is still Hund, but that in English used to be Hund, and then it got turned into hound with H-O-U-N-D. And you just had like a lot of Frenchifying. There was a lot of Frenchifying. So we've gone from rune Germanic language to Latin Christian butchery into French funkification. They also started adding G's to heavy, like, guttural sounds. So for example, night used to be N-I-H-T, and might was the same, M-I-H-T, and then they became N-I-G-H-T and M-I-G-H-T. And they also started doing this thing where they would take away syllables. So for example, name used to be Name, and then it just got shortened to name. And like used to be Leica, and then it was like. And then Kneifer, knife, Kneifer, that was actually a pronounced K. And the same as like Knie. In German, it's still Knie, but the French couldn't stand this. They could, the K at the beginning, they were having none of it. They were like, old English people. We'll leave it in on the spelling front, but we can't do that. Us Frenchies can't handle the K at the beginning, so we're gonna stop saying it. And also the E at the end, no, that's silent now as well. And so Name then became name with the silent E at the end, and then Kneifer became knife. But also they changed the CW spelling at the beginning of words like queen into the Frenchy way of QU. So it used to be K-W-in, which to me makes so much more sense. And to be honest, I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think when I was very young, I was spelling something which should have started with a Q, and I was like, sound it out. Okay, K-W-I. Ah, yeah, it's CW. I was right in Old English. I was spot on. Maybe I'm not dyslexic. Maybe actually what it is I'm just writing perfect Old English. Maybe that's what it is. To be honest, I'm very vigilant about spelling, so I'm probably a better speller than most people because it does not come to me innately. It is through the fact that I have read so many books that I can now spell well. But it never makes sense to me. I'm like, that's not how we should spell things. This is an absolute disaster. This is absolute hogwash. So then the Norman Conquest was like 1066, and kind of the Frenchification lasted until the 1400s. And then you had this thing called Chancery Standard, which was basically in the 1400s where the King's Court of Chancery started writing shit down. And that sort of like cemented spellings into their absolute nonsense. So once you had all this spelling stuff, people were like, okay, well, if that's how the king's spelling it, then everyone else should spell it that way, even if it was absolute chaos. We've now been stuck with whatever was set in the Chancery Standard, even though you had all this chaos being Germanic language run through Latin that can't really handle it, and then Frenchified. That's where we got to. But then it got even weirder, because when the printing presses were invented, so in 1476, William Caxton introduced the printing presses, and then the Dutch were like on it. They were like, we'll print, we can do the printing. However, no one explained how things should be spelt. So because dumb had a silent B at the end, and no one had explained that that's literally dumb and should have been let go of because no one pronounced it anymore, they then used that silent B to go on things like limb and crumb and numb, even though no one was using it. It should have just been eradicated before the point of printing. There was a moment in history where we could have gone like, it's dumb to have a B in dumb. Bye! And instead, we just settled that straight into our spelling chaos. And you also got the extra treat of added H's for no reason other than the fact that the Dutch have that habit. So for example, ghost, that H in there wasn't there before. Didn't exist in English before, even through your weird Frenchification, wasn't there. Just the Dutch were like, oh, well, we spell it with an H, so you're welcome. Why is it there still? Because we are lazy, because we will not upgrade our language in any way. I don't understand why there's still B's in limbs and crumbs and dumbs and numbs. We just haven't got rid of it. Same as all these silent E's we don't use, and the silent K's, and the useless L's in should, would, and could. In fact, could only has an L in it because would and should had an L in it. They just thought, let's add an L. Just make it fit in, match it up. No better reason than that. Also, salmon. What's the L doing in there? No idea. Absolutely no idea. And like poor foreigners, they're like salmon. We should just do them a favour. Just scrub out the L. We don't need it. Leaves it. Also, a lot of silent letters were added to signify that posh people knew where the word might have come from. Sometimes they were wrong. Like, for example, isle. I-S-L-E. They thought that came from insula. No, and this is also why island has an S in it, because they thought isle and island related must come from insula. No. You're just wrong on that front. But things like the B in debt comes from debitum. So that B is just like silently referenced in the way that we spell debt. The same as the B in doubt, because it came from dubitare, and the P in receipt, that comes from receptor, and the G in sign comes from signum. All of these crossovers were like around like 1551. But this was when the Renaissance was kind of rebirthing their interest in ancient Greek and Latin. So they were like, oh yes, we know where this comes from, so we will stick in a silent letter just to show off that we are knowledgeable. Take it out, man. We don't need your ego. It's just screwing over the foreigners and the dyslexics. Seriously, we can get rid of it. We can let go of the silent letters. But in saying that, I'm going to take you through now the words that I'm going to introduce into the English language. And we're going to go with spellings that are reflecting English as we use it now. For example, we have a few silent letters in there, even though I understand they are foul to the foreigner and the dyslexic. But these words are developed in reference to how we spell words now. And so it's sort of what you would expect as a fluent English speaker and writer and reader. So the first word is extramily. And this is relatives of a person who are qualified by law or tertiary connection, particularly tangential family members who the person doesn't really feel emotionally or socially close to. So this is a collective noun, and so an example of this would be my extramily are all cat owners, so I spent Christmas sneezing because we stayed with my wife's aunt and I sneezed on my nephew's girlfriend. That would be an example of the use of extramily. And you also have extramin, which is a singular relative by law or tertiary connection, and that's a noun. And an example would be, my aunt's stepson is such an annoying extramin that I don't really want to buy him a birthday present. So that's word one, and it has its little extra word. Word 1.5, or whatever you want to think of it, 1.1. The second word is mole-free, and mole-free is the smell of money in the first case, which is a noun. And an example of this would be the Bank of England has a tannic mole-free, exponentially rarefied by digital payments. The second use of mole-free is an adjective, and this is giving off the olfactory experience of the smell of money. So for example, Elon Musk stood behind me in the queue and his mole-free scent was vomit-inducing. That's an example. Okay, word number 3, Silvexed. I think this is so important. If you have someone that you know, or you are someone who suddenly becomes very polite and poised when they are ferociously angry, this is for you. So the definition will be to become simultaneously poised and livid. And it's an adjective. And so an example of this would be, my mother became Silvexed when my uncle said he didn't like her cooking and she politely told him to meet her in the kitchen before we heard her shouting at him. That's a Silvexed woman. Next we have squaffed, which is the shape of something with a vague periphery. This would be an adjective, and an example would be the deflated balloon took on a squaffed shape. So kind of like weird shaped things. Very difficult to describe. Okay, next we have schmuckette. And a schmuckette is a teenager or young adult who prioritizes aesthetics and wears a lot of makeup. So this is a noun because it is a teenager. And an example would be the cafe hired a new schmuckette to attract more teenage clientele. So you know, there's people who are just like absolutely always fiddling with their hair, wearing lots of makeup, just obsessed with the way that they look. Them's be schmuckettes. Okay, this one is super important and I really want to get people using it, okay? Latterlute. And this is a style of thought in a manner that takes in a broad scope when assessing a subject or concept. So this is like broad thinking, right? And so it's an adjective, and an example would be, AI cannot give a latterlute answer because it is programmed for a narrow scope response. This is the one I really want people to use because it's a value we're losing. The ability to do like broad thinking laterally, like this is the one I really want to get out there. And then another version of that would be a noun that's laterlution, broad thinking and problem solving that uses human type extrapolation that computers fail to use. An example would be, the boss paid the tech team to come in on a Saturday for a thorough laterlution to extend accessibility for their app. This is a value we don't value because we don't have a word for it. Like, we need a word, and then once we have a word, then we value the thing, and then we can bring it back into the way that we process the world. Lateral thinking, super important. We are losing it by the day. Okay, the next one is freaking adorable, and that's Bundy mumps. So Bundy mumps is the indentations left on the body by apparel. And this is like when you wear something that's too tight and it leaves like marks on your body, or like if you had a hat and it left like a band across your head, that's a Bundy mump. So this is a noun, and an example would be, the smocking on the little girl's dress sleeves left Bundy mumps on her arms. So like imagine she has really tight sleeves and then they leave little like indentations when she takes the dress off or lifts the sleeve up. The next word is appolite, and I've needed this word in my life. It's just so useful. So it's the desire for low density fresh food. So like on a really hot day when you don't really want to have anything stodgy, you just want like something light and fresh, like that's an appolite. That's the desire you're having, is an appolite. So this is a noun, and an example would be, snacks will be enough because I only have an appolite. Like, you know, just like, I just want like a mini fruit salad or something like that. Just it's your appolite, you know? The next one is arcane. And this is the falseness of something that becomes widely believed due to being referred to frequently. So this is an adjective. Basically like something that is just said enough that people start taking it for reality, even if it never was. And so an example would be, I'm sure that everything Trump says is utterly arcane. And I think there's many things out there that are utterly arcane. A lot of them are like, wives' tales of like carrots make you see in the dark, but it's just repeated so much that we just take it to be true. And the last word is so useful for the neurodivergent community. And if you don't take this on and start using it, I'll be incredibly disappointed in you. So high stakes here, listen up. The last word is hovermax. And hovermax is a verb. And to hovermax is to be exhausted by the limbo of waiting or executive dysfunction. So if I'm hovermaxing, then I'm just kind of exhausting myself in waiting for something or trying to make a decision. And to hovermax uses up energy, right? So you might externally see someone who's totally still, but actually they're using up all their energy in that moment because they're just hovering between decisions or waiting for more information about something. And an example would be the stress of her exams made her hovermax in the library for an hour before she actually opened a textbook. Now, please tell me in the comments below if you are someone who has experienced hovermaxing, because this is real. Why do we not have a word for it? This is so real. I feel it all the time. Like, when you're like, you have agreed to go out on a social occasion and you've had a shower and then you're just sat on the toilet in a towel for like 20 minutes, not doing anything. Hovermaxing, totally hovermaxing, stuck in the limbo of the situation. Or like if you have to do your taxes and then you just do everything else and you don't really approach it. Like this is hovermaxing, right? You're just in this kind of limbo avoidance state. And sometimes it's not even avoidant. You just kind of gone into like gentle shutdown mode. But yes, so I'm going to go over the list one more time. So, extramily, you know who they are. You don't want to buy them gifts at Christmas. With the side point being the singular, extramen. Usually very annoying younger generation people, but can be annoying racist older ones as well. I'm not discriminating. It can be anyone who's related tertiarily that you don't feel particularly close to. Next, Malfrey, which you can have both as a noun and as an adjective, because I'm just that generous, which is the scent of money. Then you have Sylvexed, which, if you can relate to it, you can relate to it. And then you have Squaffed, things with very undescribable shapes. And then you have Schmucket, those people who are obsessed with how they look. Then you have Latalute and Latolution. Please use them. If we use those words, it will bring back the value of lateral thinking. And then you have Bundy mumps. Try and avoid clothes that leave you with Bundy mumps. And then you have Appolite, which, honestly, if we all took on having an Appolite as an acceptable principle in restaurants, we could have a separate menu that's just fresh, light dishes for everyone. It'd be great, an Appolite menu. And then you have Echane, which is kind of to deal with the echo chamber of information that we have targeted at us from social media platforms and what so what. But then we have Hovermax, which, if you are a neurodivergent person, you already know what that is. All right? So these are my words. This is my gift to humanity. I might not be Shakespearing on you. This isn't my 2,000 words to offer up to the English language. But this little lexicon of mine shall be divine if we use it. So go forth, use those words, and we can actually start developing more values because we have words for things that are important, or we can start communicating the situations that we are going through, especially when we're like frozen, or we can just explain the shape of a balloon. Go forth, use these words.